Everybody, today I'm super excited that I get to interview one of the top anti aging experts in the world, Dr. Bill Andrews. Now, he insisted that I call him Bill instead of Dr. Andrews, but he's the CEO and founder of Sierra Sciences, which is a company focused on finding ways to extend the human lifespan and health span through telomere maintenance. Now, we're going to get into what telomeres and telomerase is, but it's a very interesting aging mechanism in our cells. So, Bill's been featured in Popular Science, The Today Show, and numerous documentaries on the topic of life extension, including The Immortalists, which was recent. Bill's also a researcher and been in biotech since 1981, focusing on cancer, heart disease, and inflammation research. Through his passion has always been in aging. In the early to mid 1990s, while at Geron Corporation, Bill led the research to discover both the RNA and protein components of human telomerase. He was awarded the second place as National Inventor of the Year in 1997. That's a big deal. Bill is also a named inventor on over 50 patents in the US on telomerase and the author of numerous scientific research studies published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. I am super excited to have him on the show today. I hope you are too. Bill, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast.
I'm glad to be here.
So you have quite an impressive resume. How did you get into the medical field and particularly into aging?
That all started when I was 10 years old. My father put the seed in my head. When he realized I was interested in science and medicine, he told me one day, I should grow up, become a doctor, and find a cure for aging. And that's been my obsession ever since. It was his too. He and I were a team until he passed away a few years ago from Alzheimer's.
You're also quite a runner and you run ultra marathons. What is your inspiration for running so much?
The adventure. I can't say I'm somebody that really likes to run. I'm just the type of person that when I see a mountain, I want to know what it looks like from the top up there, what's over the other side, and I just am addicted to going to some places, and most of the places you can't get to by motor vehicles and stuff. So running is something I do, and if I do run in a race or something like that, I just consider it training so that I can go on my adventures.
And you're running 100 miles of trails in some of these races?
Yes, and further. There's been at least 3 times where I've gone up to like 135 or 138 miles.
Oh my goodness. That's really hardcore. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's all fun. I love it.
I want to come back to the running piece and how much you're running in the context of telomeres in a little bit, but let's move on.
Okay.
So for the listeners to kind of get into this, Bill, would you describe for the listeners what exactly are telomeres?
Telomeres are things that are found at the tips of your chromosomes. If you think of your chromosome as a shoelace, the telomeres are the same as the aglets on your shoelaces. They protect the shoelace. Telomeres protect the chromosomes. We know that when the aglets get really short, the shoelace falls apart. And the same thing happens with our chromosomes. So we got to keep them from getting really short.
Okay, how long are telomeres at birth, and how fast do they naturally decline?
Well, first of all, DNA is measured in units of bases, called bases. DNA is like a string of beads. Each bead's called a base. Mm-hmm. And a chromosome is about 100 million bases in length on average. The telomeres, 15,000 bases, so very small. And it's only really that length when we're first conceived, when we're single cell embryos.
Okay. And then when we get older, does that change? At what do we have any measurements on when we're 35 or 55, how long the basis pairs are?
Yeah, I mean, it changes the second our cells start to divide. Every time a cell divides, the telomeres get a little bit shorter. And it's not because something chews them away necessarily. There are things that can chew them away to accelerate the telomere shortening. But it's just the cell lacks the ability to be able to duplicate the very tips of its chromosomes during DNA replication, during cell division. And as a result, every time a cell divides, the new chromosomes that get made are a little bit shorter. The next time they divide, those chromosomes are even shorter, or the telomeres of those chromosomes are shorter. So we're conceived at 15,000 bases, and there's so much cell division to go from a single cell embryo to the newborn baby that the telomeres shorten down to 10,000 bases before we're even born. Now, that's okay, because if you think about cutting off the aglets of your shoelaces, just cutting off 1/3 of them, the shoelaces are still perfectly fine. But the problem doesn't stop there, because we still have a lot of cell division. We have to heal our wounds. We have to fight our infections. We have some cells in our body, like our skin cells, our immune cells, and the cells lining our intestines and guts. Those cells divide all the time. So they're dividing. Telomeres are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And when telomeres get down to 5,000 bases, our cells lose the ability to function. And that's when we die of old age.
Do we know, Bill, what age we get to that 5,000 bases?
Yeah, 125 years. Okay, so nobody actually ever gets there. Nobody in recorded history has lived that long. There's stories about some people that live to be 900 plus years old, but those are all now pretty certain to be due to the fact that the calendar definition used to be different. Like a year might have been a month or something like that. But if you have the absolute perfect genetics and lead the absolute perfect lifestyle, your telomeres will allow you to live to be 125. You also have to avoid being run over by a bus or something like that too. Mm-hmm. But 125. Now, nobody has the perfect genetics and nobody leads the perfect lifestyle. And so we do a lot of things that cause our telomeres to accelerate. They're shortening to accelerate. And that makes us die younger than we normally would.
Mm-hmm. So let's touch on Hayflick limit for a second, which really states that normal human cells can only divide about 50 times or so until they stop dividing. And is this mainly because the telomeres have become too short?
It's 100% because the telomeres become too short. Leonard Hayflick discovered the Hayflick limit in 1961. And for years afterwards, everybody used to say there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. Nothing, human cells have this limit. There's nothing you can do about it. Until I came along and led this team that discovered the enzyme telomerase to lengthen telomeres and showed that just that and that alone caused cells to completely obliterate the Hayflick limit.
That must have been a fascinating discovery that you guys did. So congratulations on that. So what you're saying, and I want to repeat this just because it's so important, is that if we can find a way to sufficiently reduce the rate of shortening of telomerase or find a way to increase the length of telomeres, then we could potentially, the cells could keep dividing forever.
Yes.
And therefore...
Forever is a long word, but we might find something else that cuts things short later on. But the way I look at it is that at least I get another 20 plus years to figure out how to overcome that hurdle.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's touch on telomerase, which is the enzyme. So how would you describe telomerase?
Well, it's an essential enzyme for the survival of our species. That's the one way to describe it. If our telomeres got shorter every time our cells divided in all of our cells, then we would have been extinct as a species. And our children would be born older than we are because their telomeres would be shorter. And so somewhere along the line, we created this enzyme called telomerase, a gene for the enzyme, but it's only turned on in our reproductive cells, more specifically the primordial germline cells. Those are the only cells in the body that actually produce telomerase. And as a result, when those cells divide, the telomeres don't get shorter. They actually do get shorter. So it's like every time the cell divides, the telomeres get a little shorter, but then telomerase re-lengthens them. So shorter, lengthen, shorter, lengthen. The result is that they don't get shorter. But so our children are born with very long telomeres. And so that's the purpose of the enzyme telomerase. And for some reason, when after our reproductive cells are formed, the gene gets shut off. And so it's actually shut off in all of the other cells of our body, 99.999% of our cells. And so that's why we have telomere shortening there. Why it gets shut off is hotly debated, but I think the best explanation for it is that survival of the species requires that the old get knocked off. So most life forms have evolved a way of getting rid of the old by different mechanisms. Not all animals age by telomere shortening, and humans do, and so do dogs, cats, horses, sheep, pig, and deer. But the telomerase is shut off so that when we have our children, they don't have to compete with the adults, and as a result, our species survives better in a rapidly changing environment, and the genes get shuffled more.
From using that theory as an example, wouldn't it make sense for telomerase to shut off after the species has reproduced? Or does it already know that it's going to take so long that we're going to reproduce in the meantime, and we're going to have the baby, so it doesn't matter if it's shut off at birth?
I believe it's shut off before birth, but I don't really know if it matters. Evolution doesn't always go with the smartest way, because evolution doesn't have a brain. It doesn't choose how to do things. It just things happen by random mutations and stuff like that. And if a mutation causes a evolutionary advantage to the species, then that mutation becomes part of that species. So in the case of our evolution, it got shut off as soon as the sperm and egg cells were made, the reproductive cells.
Let's also explore one more concept of cellular senescence. And as you said, most human cells divide about 50 times and then get into a state of senescence, which also happens to be some kind of a protective mechanism if the cell undergoes any kind of mutation. So, Bill, would you describe for us what senescence is, and does every cell go into senescence?
Yeah, it depends on the species. And senescence in different species is caused by different things. For instance, rodents, they go into senescence too, but it's not at all caused by the same thing that humans' senescence is caused by. But senescence is really not killing of cells. It's just telling cells to stop dividing. Those cells still function. They actually have some bad characteristics that actually cause other cells around them that aren't senescence to be unhealthy. But the senescent cells still are healthy. It can take weeks, months, maybe even years before those senescent cells actually die. But senescence is just a state of no cell division.
And is that okay if we have a lot of cells in the senescence phase, if you will?
It's not okay, because that's what aging is. And I do believe, I'm very excited about this whole new field called senolytics. But I am cautious about it, because even though it works in mice, and as I said, mice senescence is different than human senescence. I'm afraid that, like a 95-year-old person, maybe 95% of their skin cells are senescent. And if you treat them with a senolytic that kills the senescent cells, killing 95% of the skin would kill that person. So it's got a lot to see. But I do think that combining with a senolytic drug, at least in humans, with a telomerase inducer or with the telomerase enzyme is the solution to that problem. So I do believe, senolytics, senescent cells are not good for us. There's nobody that would ever say they are. The question is how to get rid of them, because they are still active, they are still alive, they still are protecting your skin from the environment and your body from the environment. The skin is our number one defense, first line of defense against infections and stuff like that. And the senescent cells still accomplish that, just not as well.
Got it. So what you're saying is, with the advances in the field that you're looking at in telomerase and telomeres, if we can keep the cells dividing for much longer, that will reduce the amount of senescent cells that we have to start with. And then the senolytics is going to come in and clean those fewer senescent cells so that we stay healthy for a much longer time period.
Yeah, when we actually have a telomerase inducer that's super potent, that it lengthens telomeres significantly, there won't be any senescent cells.
So the entire field of senolytics is then just going to go away when you get to your solution.
Yes, I guess. I don't know. I can't predict the future. I just know that we can't focus just on one thing. I'm very grateful that a lot of people are doing a lot of other things, because personally I want my life to be extended as long as possible, and I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure going to be glad that somebody like Aubrey de Grey is correct. You know, I'm a big supporter of Aubrey de Grey and others.
Yeah, there's so much energy and excitement and finally funding going to this anti-aging field that people are starting to say that there is a solution within our grasp shortly.
Well, don't fool yourself. The funding is nowhere near what's needed. Okay, Aubrey de Grey is not getting anywhere near the funding he really needs to get his work done. Either am I. But you know, we're both working on it, and that's unfortunately, since before 2008, the global financial crisis of 2008, I did have enough money. But all my investors lost the ability to fund anymore, and I'm trying to resurrect that right now.
Bummer. Let's get into something else that I know you've talked about in the past, and it keeps being brought up in the context of telomeres and telomerase, which is basically if we can lengthen or stop the shortening of telomeres, then the cells keep dividing. Unfortunately, that also happens to be the mechanism of action for diseases like cancer, where there's a mutation and those cells keep dividing. And I believe you say that the length of telomeres does not cause cancer, or longer telomeres don't cause cancer. Why do you say that?
Well, first of all, you said the mechanism of cancers is telomeres, and it's actually not. Actually, long telomeres actually prevent cancer, and you know, can actually help the body fight cancer, especially getting the immune cells long. This is a common rumor, misinterpretation of things. I kind of feel like it originates probably from when I first, led the team that discovered telomerase. And one of the things we did was we put the antisense of telomerase into cancer cells and showed that we could kill every cancer cell by essentially causing the telomeres to get short really fast. But that didn't mean that telomerase caused the cancer. A lot of people who actually have no background in cancer actually said, well, shoot, if inhibiting telomerase killed the cancer cell, then telomerase must be the cause of that cancer. Mm-hmm. And that's completely incorrect. What was I going to say? So telomerase, if you have telomerase and you keep telomeres long, the thing I was going to say was the biggest problem with the telomeres is that when they get critically short, so when they get close to 5,000 bases or even get shorter than 5,000 bases in some cases, the mutation rate skyrockets. And those mutations are the things that cause cancer. And all cancers, every single cancer that's ever been characterized has been shown to be caused by a mutation. So the goal is to keep the mutations down, and keeping telomeres long is a really good way to do that. If you allow a cell to continually, and if you allow your cells in your body to continually divide and keep the telomeres long, if one of those cells became cancer anyway, okay, because you can also get mutations by radiation and food you eat and stuff like that. If one of those cells became a cancer, your immune system, because its telomeres are long, will fight that cancer right away and get rid of it. I always say, telomerase can cause cancer by combining with other mutations, but it's the other mutations that cause the cancer. And cancer, my goal is to try to repeat the same logic that cancer cells use to extend their lifespan, and that's to lengthen telomeres. But lengthening telomeres was not the cause of cancer. If you lengthen telomeres in a non-cancer cell, the chances of that cell ever becoming cancer get decreased immensely. That's been shown now in lots of scientific peer-reviewed studies. So it's the problem is that if you let the telomeres get short, and those shortened telomeres cause mutations that turn some of your cells into cancer cells. Then if those cancer cells are dividing, if they have more mutations that actually turn on the telomerase gene, because every cancer cell that has the telomerase gene being turned on is done by a mutation. If you turn the telomerase gene on, then you allow that cancer cell to survive. But it was already cancer. It was already cancer beforehand. If you have a cancer, so if you already have a cancer and you take a telomerase inducer, that is going to provide benefit to that cancer. There's no question about it. That's bad news. But it's also going to provide benefit to your immune cells. So you wouldn't want to give telomerase just to your cancer cells. You want to give it to your immune cells too, so your immune cells can fight. And even then, there's a chance that your immune system won't win and you'll die of that cancer. So there is a way that I can explain that telomerase could cause cancer. But I can explain even better how the lack of telomerase will cause cancer. And the lack of telomerase is going to far more likely cause cancer than the presence of telomerase. And I always, I use analogies, and one analogy I like is a lot of people would drive across country because they're afraid to fly. And the fact is, flying's a lot safer than driving. But people are still believing that it's safer for them to drive instead of fly. And it's the same thing here. It's safer for people to not have telomerase than to get telomerase, they think. But it's the exact opposite. You're far more unlikely to get cancer if you have telomerase being produced in your cells and your telomeres stay long.
Got it. So if I may, you're saying that a lot of mutations are caused when telomeres get really short. And so let's eliminate that cause of the mutations by keeping our telomeres long.
Yes.
Secondly, there will always be other ways that cancers form, be that radiation, be that chemotherapy, be that ROS, and other ways. So yes, we can't discount those causes of cancer, but if we keep the telomeres long in both the cancerous cells as well as the immune cells, then we have so many immune cells that hopefully they'll overpower all the cancerous mutations and kill them all off before they can become true cancers.
Exactly. Correct.
Okay. Got it. Thank you for explaining that. Now, the other question I get, Bill, from folks here are it's telomeres and how do I test for my telomeres? Like, what does my biological age mean? And there's companies like TeloYears and obviously SpectraCell that's being used by a bunch of anti-aging clinics. And so I've been tempted to do it myself for the last year. I've been thinking about it. So I wanted to ask you, are those the only two tests? Are there more? And which ones are accurate versus not?
Well, I can answer some of those questions. First, let me say, and I'm sure you already know this, the field of anti-aging has more quacks and charlatans than any field ever. And one of the things that the charlatans have really lashed onto is providing tests that measure telomeres. But most of them don't measure telomeres very accurately at all. It's not telomeres don't play a role, it's just their ability to measure them is so inaccurate that I personally hardly believe anything. The one exception is, and the part I can answer is I don't really want to get into describing the different companies and who's accurate and who's not, only because I'm a research scientist and I want to stay out of the marketing and stuff like that, and I don't want to get lawsuits against me and stuff like that. But I can tell you that if somebody really wants to get their telomeres length measured, find a place that will measure the percent of telomeres that are short. And that is the most important number because average telomeres are really hard to determine and they also don't mean anything. I mean, as I said, when we cut off 1/3 of the cap on our shoelace is still stable. Well, it's not the average length of the telomeres that's important. It's the percent that are critically short. And so when you find that you have like 20% critically short telomeres in your body, that's bad news, okay? But you can do something about it because even though there's some there's a lot of telomerase inducers on the market, and I'm an inventor of almost all of them. They're not potent enough to actually turn somebody like 96-year-old Betty White into a 25-year-old, which is what I want to do as soon as possible. She would be a terrible loss to this world. But the ones that are on the market that do work, and they're too weak to turn Betty White into a young person again, they are potent enough to actually make the really critically short telomeres a little bit longer. Sometime in this interview, I'll mention two of my books, and I go into a lot of detail in my second book describing why they lengthen, why the shortest telomeres get longer, even though the longest ones don't, and they still get shorter. And yeah, that's what it pretty much is.
Okay. To wrap up that question, then, you don't recommend anybody go out and get telomere tests done to figure out their biological age at this time?
Unless they go to a place that measures the percent that are short. That number is actually quite informative to me.
Is there a company that you're aware of that measures percentages?
Yes, and I would actually ask that I don't get into where I'm naming names of companies, because I don't get into marketing. I just do research.
Fair enough. Now, Bill, the challenge that I have with these generic tests that include the population as a whole is, that we have a lot of sick people in this country, and in general, the health of the entire country is declining, even though now we have access to so much more information about health. So I worry that if I go compare myself to the average population, and I'm a pretty healthy guy, then I'm going to find that I am younger anyway. And so that would feel great to me, but it's really, I'm at the age that I should be for a healthy male. So it's kind of like the skew is happening so far down the other way that I'm going to feel good about myself, that compared to somebody that's 60 pounds too heavy, I'm younger, right? Because the average age has gone down, if you will. So anyway, let's move on.
I didn't have an answer. I don't even get into that area of stuff like that. But you sound like you have a handle on that. So good.
Fair enough. So let's now talk about the actual how we combat the shortening of telomeres. And there's two ways as I understand them. And I'd like to ask you questions on both. One is that you reduce the rate of shortening, so the speed of shortening, how fast telomeres shorten every time a cell division happens. And there's, I believe, multiple ways to do this, mostly relating to lifestyle. So do you want to tell me some ways that we could do reduce the rate?
Well, everything your mother ever told you is true. The number one things that cause accelerated telomere shortening are inflammation and free radicals, or ROS, as you put it, reactive oxygen species. So you want to decrease those, but the things that cause those are smoking, obesity, lack of exercise, depression, even stress. So psychological stress and regular physical stress too. All those things cause telomeres. And then there's also, if you don't believe you're going to live longer, you aren't, because even people have done studies on people that think they're going to die, and it turns out their telomeres are shorter. If there's a psychological, I don't know if I would actually read those studies and validate that the studies were done correctly, but it is kind of interesting that pessimism is correlated with short telomeres. There's two studies out saying that. So that said, there are things like reducing stress is really important, physical and biological stress, and yoga. I speak at a lot of yoga conferences. I'm a big yoga person, but I got into yoga only because studies have been showing that people who do yoga have longer telomeres, and it's because it reduced the stress. It didn't make them longer. A lot of people get confused with that. A lot of people say, well, yoga lengthens your telomeres, but it didn't. It actually just decreased the rate of shortening. And so so yoga is one of those things, especially there's yin yoga, which is probably one of the better types of yoga to do to keep your telomeres as long as possible. But there's also like endurance exercise. Now, endurance exercise gets a bad rap all the time because most of the studies on endurance look at the real fast runners that finish marathons on their hands and knees throwing up. You know, that's bad for you. That causes a lot of stress for you. But running, if you do running and you run like every day and you always keep it fun, and if it stops being fun, you quit, you know, and save it for another day, that actually has been shown to actually keep your telomeres long and decrease inflammation and stress. And your body becomes used to it. Whereas if you go out running every 2 weeks and then enter a marathon, you'll probably do really well, but your body's going to think, wow, this is a terrible thing. I'm being infected by something, and it's going to start attacking all the joints because that's where the pain is. Next thing you know, you get lots of inflammation, and next day after the race, even though you did really well, you're stiff as a board, and your telomeres get shorter as a result of that.
That's very interesting. So I have a follow-up question on that.
Okay.
So I love all these ideas, what our mother, in effect, told us. In particular with running, I know you're an avid runner, and I used to think of long endurance exercise every day, every other day, as akin to being a BMW that just came out of a factory. And if you think about the wear and tear, a BMW with 5,000 miles you put on every year is going to do better, just all other things being equal, than somebody that you put in, or a BMW you put in 20,000 miles a year. So what is your perspective on just general wear and tear versus telomeres when you're doing so much endurance exercise?
Well, BMW does not have cells to replace the damaged cells, and humans do. And so that's why when I talk a lot, I would talk about an old truck sitting in a field, how it's been destroyed from the weather and the rain and the wind and things like that. But when we get a sunburn, we have cells that divide to replace those cells. And so we don't really have the same kind of wear and tear. And if you do it all the time, it's a lot less damage. The damage occurs from a lot of times from not doing things often enough that your body isn't used to. So yeah, it's the wear and tear does occur, and it does become very prominent in the later years. But using running as an analogy again, if you don't run all the time, every time you do run, you have more wear and tear than if you ran all the time. Your joints, you know, it's a lot of people who don't run all the time are getting their knees replaced, their hips replaced, and their ankles replaced. But people that run all the time are not having that problem. It's because the joints get lubricated and they stay lubricated. And if you don't run, they get unlubricated, and you go out and run with unlubricated joints, that causes a lot of wear and tear. I could use an analogy just about for everything that we do that causes wear and tear like that.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying. The other final piece, and you touched on this earlier, I wanted to ask about prevention or reducing the rate of telomere shortening is to avoid, would be maybe to avoid injuries or diseases. So basically preventing cell division, which then induces your telomere shortening. Would that be an effective strategy?
Yeah, do whatever you can to decrease the rate of cell division. That's
okay. And what might be some examples? Obviously, don't get a scrape on the side of the road in the asphalt, but what might you suggest as strategies for that?
Well, live in a bubble. That's the problem.
Right.
Stay out of the sun. But you know, I don't want everybody to be, you know, living horrible, unhappy lives. I do believe that we are going to have a solution to all these problems soon. So I say, go out and get your tan. You know, go out and drink. You know, I don't drink, but I've got no problems with anybody else drinking. Because even drinking has been shown to cause accelerated telomere shortening. But you know, I wouldn't recommend smoking because that's just unhealthy in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Now let's talk or shift our attention to the other way, which is we're actually increasing the length of telomeres through induction of telomerase, which is the enzyme that you spoke about that does it. So what are the various ways that we can increase the length of telomeres at this point?
There's only one, and that's telomerase. I mean, some cancer cells have, especially those cancer cells that get killed. So let's go back to cancer for a second, because this is important. There are drugs right now that will kill telomerase positive cancer cells. But every single time after you see that 99.99% of the cancer cells have been killed off, the short telomeres in those cancers induce mutations that allow the cancer to find other ways to turn on telomerase besides, or to lengthen telomeres besides telomerase. Mm-hmm. And those pathways are all accumulated into something called the ALT pathway, ALT, for alternative lengthening of telomeres. And let's see, what was I going to say there? So the cancers come back. Why did I go off into that analogy? Remind me what the question was.
Yeah,
sorry.
so the question is, with the second way being to increase telomeres length is to induce telomerase or get telomerase in the cells. How do we do that?
Yeah, I was saying the only way is telomerase, unless you're a cancer cell. A lot of cancer cells by mutation have created the ALT pathway that lengthens telomeres too. But telomerase is the only way that's ever been discovered to lengthen telomeres. And we have two approaches to actually providing your cells with telomerase enzyme to lengthen the telomeres. And one is to take a pill that contains a natural product or a synthetic chemical that will float into your cells and bind to the proteins that shut the gene off and essentially dislodge those proteins from the gene, which causes the gene to turn on. So there's at least 3 different things on the market now. We have like 1,000 at Sierra Sciences, 1,000 different chemicals and natural products that will do that. But the best ones are all on the market right now, and there's at least three on the market right now. For every one that's on the market that works, there's also 100 out there that are just complete charlatan stuff that don't work.
Can you name the 3 that work?
Again, I don't want to get into the products and stuff like that, if that's possible. But people can find these things by Googling my name and things like that, because essentially I'm either part inventor or complete inventor of all of them. And there's only one that I know of that I'm only part inventor of. I'm full inventor of all the other ones. The other approach, okay, so that's the chemical approach, to go in, chemical or natural products, to go in and turn the gene on that you already have. The other way is to deliver telomerase to your cells. And you can't deliver the protein itself, the enzyme itself, because it's too big to get inside of cells. But you can deliver the gene, and when the gene gets inside of the cell, the gene produces telomerase. So we've been doing that for, I want to say, 25 years. That's called gene therapy. And we've been doing that ever since I used to work at Geron Corporation, where we first discovered telomerase. The problem with gene therapy, delivering genes to a cell, is that the gene therapy itself has side effects. Okay, so most of the gene therapies work by actually integrating themselves into the chromosome, which causes mutations, and they randomly integrate. And so sometimes they integrate into a tumor suppressor gene and inactivating the tumor suppressor gene, or integrating upstream of an oncogene, which turns on a cancer gene. And so you got to avoid those. But the good news is, so we've been doing this, but a lot of the research that we've done has been using these kind of gene therapies, because right now they're the only ones that are potent enough to actually turn an old cell into a young cell. And we did this back in the 1990s, where we turned old cells in a petri dish into young cells in every way imaginable. And then after I left Geron Corporation and started my own company, Sierra Sciences, other people, like a guy named Walter Funk, who used to work with me, he actually took human skin and grew it on the back of a mouse. And using gene therapy, he was able to turn old skin into young skin. And then Dr. Ron DePinel, using engineered mice, as I mentioned before, mice don't age by telomere shortening, but he did create mice that do. Mm-hmm. And when he treated those mice with gene therapy and telomerase, he saw those mice become younger in every way imaginable. And that includes their brain function coming back, which was really exciting because it kind of suggests that Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia are not the loss of memory, but loss of access to the memory. And lengthening telomeres reconnects those connections, lost connections.
Now, go ahead.
I was just want to say that we've been able to do that because, it's okay if 1/3 of the mice die from the gene therapy, you just look at the survivors. But in the last, 10 years ago, we started working with a new kind of gene therapy called AAV that does not integrate itself into the chromosomes. And that's what we've been working on for the last, really a lot in the last 10 years. And we are actually getting ready to do our first clinical study of a human. And we're expecting that to be late October, early November of this year. We're actually doing dress rehearsals right now to make certain we have everything done correctly. And we are going to be treating patients. The FDA requires that in a phase 1 clinical study, you work with terminal patients, especially if you're doing something like a pharmaceutical chemical or a gene therapy or something like that. So one disease that's caused by short telomeres that is 100% terminal is Alzheimer's. So we are treating people that have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's 6-7 years ago, because typically you die 6-7 years after you're diagnosed. So we're treating these, and I'm hoping that we're going to save these people. I'm hoping that they're suddenly, their memories are going to come back. One of the main reasons you die of Alzheimer's is your brain quits telling you how to breathe and swallow and things like that. They're not going to have that problem. Their memories are going to come back. They're going to start being able to cognitively think better. And the side effect is they're going to get younger in every way imaginable. And so that's what we've got going on. And I'm real excited about that because that's going to happen this year.
I think everybody would take that side effect, and I'm crossing my fingers for your trial here.
The downside is it's very expensive, and nobody's going to be able to afford it. But it's a proof of concept for us because I really want to focus on creating that chemical or natural product that does the same thing, and that just requires a lot, at least 3 more years and probably $50 to $100 million.
Is it expensive, Bill? Because the human body's got 100 trillion cells, and therefore you've got to send the genes to almost every cell to turn on the telomerase. Yes. So there's a lot of quantity that you need to send in. That's why it's expensive.
Yeah, and that's the main expense is to create a gene therapy. You need bioreactors that are like 2,000 liters in size, and to make enough to treat one person once. You need approximately a 2,000 liter bioreactor that has to grow cells that you harvest the gene therapy from for like 6 weeks or longer. And wow. It's now there's also the clinical study is more expensive. Of course, the patients, they don't have to pay for it, though some patients have offered to. That's mostly coming out of our own pockets, but that's because we also, in addition to prepping up the gene therapy, we also have to do every test imaginable. I don't want to treat somebody with something like this if we don't have all our baseline studies done and then studies all along the way, not only to see if they get younger or smarter, but also to see if they stay safe. Okay, lots of safety studies, and that amounts to a lot of money too.
Yeah.
Fortunately, after the clinical studies are done, they won't have to pay, clients won't have to pay for that part.
Yeah. Now, you did say there's 2 ways to kind of induce the telomerase in the cells. One is to turn on the gene that we already have in the cell that's been turned off since we're born, as you said. And the other way is to do the gene therapy to deliver this gene to the cells. And this product that you're describing, the trial you're going to start, the study, is the gene therapy solution. Is there a solution you have for turning on the gene in the cells?
Well, we have the weak solutions, but I would say our best one produces about 16% as much telomerase inside of a cell as needed to stop telomere shortening. So the telomere is still shortened; they just shorten at a slower rate. But my company will receive royalties from the gene therapy. And so even though you might be a multimillionaire in order to be able to afford it, we will get a royalty that will go 100% into our research, and we will use that to continue the research we were doing very actively up until 2008 and less actively since. But we'll continue that research, and I think we're 1 to 3 years away from having a natural product or a pharmaceutical that will be potent enough to produce enough telomerase to lengthen telomeres. And of course, I prefer that be a natural product because there's less clinical studies that need to be done if that's the case. But I'm right now not hedging my bets on anything. I just want something that's affordable. I'm hoping it will cost us 10 cents a person at the most.
And whoever makes that product is going to be a trillionaire in no time, I assume.
That's not my goal. My goal is to just get this stupid disease we have called aging to end. And then after I get that done, or if somebody else like Aubrey de Grey gets it done, I want to go work on something else because we still have other diseases and stuff like that we got to work on.
Sure. So on Sierra Sciences, which is your company, on the website, I see, and it's not an ad, I guess, it's a link for TAM818. Is that the 16% solution you're talking about?
That's a link for Defy Time, or Defy Time that sells TAM818.
And that's a separate company that's not owned by you or affiliated?
Not us at all. We do get a royalty that, again, 100% goes into our research. We're still not at the level of royalties or funding that we were before 2008. But I'm hoping that Defy Time can do a really good marketing and get that out, and people would benefit from it tremendously. Because even though it's not going to turn Betty White into a 25 years old, it does have the potency that is expected that you need to lengthen at least the really critically short telomeres. And I don't know of any really good studies, but there are definitely too many anecdotal studies that have shown that even lengthening the shortest telomeres provides anti-aging benefits.
Got it. And I've certainly heard of TAM818 before, Bill, and so have I heard. I also have heard of TA65, which is, I believe, another supplement on the market. And neither of these are cheap when you consider the average supplement budget for a normal person. In your opinion, why are these in the 800 to 1,000 to even more? What's causing the price to be so high?
In all fairness, if now you've mentioned TA65 and TAM818, I should mention the third one, and that's Isogenesis, used by a company called Isogenics. And that actually is the least expensive of all. So, I take all three every day. Okay?
All three.
Yeah, I believe that they could be synergistic, and I'm obsessed with trying to live young as long as possible.
Well, I'll definitely include the links, if you're okay, to these three compounds in the show notes for this episode.
Let me say, if we are mentioning names, the company that I think is best for measuring the length of telomeres is actually LifeLength, LIFE LENGTH, and they have really good scientists and really good work going on looking at the percent of telomeres that are short.
Got it. Well, thank you for sharing. I'll include that as a link as well, and I'll probably send or I'll contact them to get a testing done for myself so I can see where I'm at. Okay. Now, so in terms of your future research, Bill, you said you're going to pivot back. So you're doing gene therapy at the moment. You're going to launch the study, but you're going to pivot back to creating some supplement or natural compound or a chemical compound that turns on the gene in the cells.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
When you're saying it's 1 to 3 years, you anticipate having a product on the market?
1 to 3 years after we get what I estimate to be $50 to $100 million, because that's how much that's going to cost. It doesn't have to be all in one lump sum, but when we start getting the funding that we can resurrect that area of our research, and we were spending $1 million a month. before I'm doing that. When we can get back to doing that, I think we're 1 to 3 years away from having something.
Okay. If you're a billionaire and you're listening to the show, you know where your next donation should go. So please contact Bill Andrews and give him some money. Let's talk about. So we talked about the research you're working on these days. I know that a lot of folks, and you're certainly one of the leaders, Bill, in the anti-aging movement, or folks that are trying to prolong their longevity and health span and all of that. Would you share what kind of protocol you're following for the listeners?
Yeah, well, let me recommend a book, because everything that I've been doing has now been all written up by somebody as smart as me, if not smarter, Dr. Sandra Kaufman.
Mm.
So she's written a book called The Kaufman Protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And every time somebody writes a book on how to stay young, supplements and things like that, I'll read that. But I've never been blown away by any book except for this one. This book is absolutely incredible. It agrees with everything I do. I do take a lot of supplements. I do a lot of lifestyle things. And this book talks about it. The book's called The Kaufman Protocol, Kaufmann, and it's written by Dr. Sandra Kaufman, and it's on Amazon.com. So that's pretty much my whole regimen is now based on that book, except that I don't remember her actually talking about the telomerase, not all the telomerase inducers, but I do that, and I do a few other things in addition to that. But the book is at least 95% of what I do.
Got it. And I have the Kaufman protocol sitting on my desk. I just haven't gotten to it yet. So thank you for reminding me of it. So you're saying you're
very well written too. That's really good. Great analogies.
Okay. Well, I'll be reading it very quickly then. So Bill, you said you follow most of your anti-aging protocol comes from her book, Dr. Sandra Kaufman's book. And then you take the 3 telomerase inducers, meaning TAM818, TA65, and isogenesis. And then what lifestyle things do you do that you could share with the audience?
Well, I'm vegan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't eat oils at all. Oils, that's one of those hearsay things that oils are good for you. They're actually not good for you. Let me recommend another book. There's a book called Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Esselstyn. That's also available on Amazon.com. And that's one of the best books ever written on reducing inflammation. Even though it's called heart disease, they make the point that the number 1 cause of heart disease is inflammation. So inflammation causes a lot of things. And so reducing inflammation is what that book's all about. And it's got that, the author of that is got more peer-reviewed studies than any other person I've ever seen who's written a book on the same subject. Books aren't peer-reviewed. People have to realize that. You can't just go by the book. You have to go and see if there's studies, scientific studies then that have been peer-reviewed and published in peer-reviewed journals. And that's the benefit. That's what makes me very interested in Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, is because he's done that. But that book, essentially, bottom line is become a vegan, and don't eat any oils, and stay away from nuts also, because nuts have a lot of oils in them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's dive into those just a little bit. According to the blue zones, and we've studied a bunch of these blue zones all around the world, and Dan Buettner has, he's found that most of these societies are vegan, or I guess they eat mostly plants and vegetables because they don't have access to meat as much, maybe some fish. So you're completely vegan. Do you take any fish oil, or do you take DHA, EPA?
That's the only oil I do take, okay? I'm a strong believer in EPA, DHA, and ALA. And plus, there's several publications now showing that omega-3 fatty acids, like DHA, EPA, and ALA, they actually help keep your telomeres long. Okay, so that was what really got me into omega-3 fatty acids, was a really good publication showing that people that take them all the time have longer telomeres than people that don't. So that is the only oil I take. I just take it every morning. But in terms of the lifestyle thing, so I'm a vegan. I eat no oils. I do take omega-3 fatty acids, and I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, Kaufman Protocol recommends it too. And then exercise-wise, I do yoga all the time, and I run. But I call running moving meditation, because the way I run, it is meditating. Okay, and if I get sore or injured or tired, I stop. Okay, but boy, you know, if you take that kind of attitude, you can find out you can run 100 miles without any trouble at all. And so I like, there's a few times where I've killed myself to get to a finish line.
Sure.
But usually I don't. I've gotten practically every award there is, and I'm right now shooting for the 70-year-old record in the 100-mile when I turn 70. I'm just preparing for that because it's so slow. I'm going to have no problems doing that. But my goal is really just to have fun, just enjoy the adventure, because it's like that's 100-mile races provide incredible amounts of adventure. Unless you run 400 times around a track, that's too boring.
Yeah. That's great to hear, Bill. Now, I just want to ask you one follow-up question on the oils. Are you not eating oils because you want to avoid the omega-6 and the proliferation of the safflower, sunflower, all of these nut oils that are known to cause a high inflammation in our bodies?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the oils, but not all omega-6s. GLA is an omega-6, and I take that too, okay, because that's anti-inflammatory. So it's not just because of the where the double bond is. It's some have it, some are anti-inflammatory, some are inflammatory. So, but yeah, oils in general, olive oil, even the virgin olive oil, sesame seed oil, soy oil, all those things are inflammatory. And you can read about that in Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn's book or his publications that are peer reviewed.
Got it. And so this fad of the ketogenic diet, and I shouldn't call it a fad, there's enough people doing it now. You don't think that's the right way to go, at least in your opinion, and according to the doctor?
I personally think the ketogenic diet is nuts. I would never do that. The biggest problem is there's another omega-3 fatty acid called arachidonic acid. And arachidonic acid is only found in meats, fish, and fowl, and eggs. Okay, so plants don't have any arachidonic acid at all. So that's a good way to avoid those. But arachidonic acid is a very inflammatory omega-3 fatty acid that you want to avoid.
Okay.
I've done a lot of homework on omega-3 fatty acids. I think they're a very interesting set of molecules that have very unusual characteristics, just by very few changes in their chemical structure.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And you've also done a lot of research in cancer, haven't you?
Yeah, well, my award I was second place for United States Inventor of the Year was for my cancer research. Even though I had been very interested all my life in anti-aging, especially when I got my PhD, I couldn't find anybody that was doing anything that made any sense to me. I'm always saying, why do people at the North and South Poles age at the same way as people on the equator? And why do dogs and cats age at different rates than humans when they're in the same environment? And most of the theories on aging don't explain all those kind of things. And so I got really frustrated when I got my PhD and was applying for postdoc positions in labs that were doing research, or aging research. And I got offered positions in every lab I applied to. I went and interviewed those places, and in all cases, I thought these guys were nuts. I thought they really didn't understand aging, and they were off on not pursuing the right thing. So I decided there had to be some kind of clock, and I'm going to look for that clock. And in the meantime, I'm going to go into biotech, because I really wasn't an academic-minded person. I want to get things done faster than academia does. So I went into biotech, and there I focused on cancer research, heart disease research, and inflammation research, until the day that I heard somebody talk about the fact that telomeres shorten in a way that works as that perfect clock, and explains why dogs and cats age different rates, and why it explained all of it. I always say that twos and twos all have to add up, and this was the first time that happened. So I jumped ship on everything. I've focused on telomere biology ever since, and I still feel that I'm still doing cancer research, heart disease research, and inflammation research.
Right, because if you knock those out, you automatically gain a few years
Yeah.
by knocking every one of those diseases out of the way.
And I did have a successful career before getting into telomeres. I actually played a role in discovering human growth hormone, erythropoietin, the drug that Lance Armstrong used to cheat
Wow.
tissue plasminogen activator, beta seron. So I actually had quite a successful career in getting involved in a lot of blockbusters. And I think all that contributed towards the ease that I had in finding investors when I decided to start my own company.
Mm-hmm.
And
Which was Sierra Sciences.
Yes, Sierra Sciences.
Now, Bill, I do want to respect your time. This has been amazing. I've got one last question for you. Since you're at the forefront of the anti-aging movement, you're one of the leaders, what do you think in your predictions, what types of step function changes in aging are we looking at over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, that's another subject that I try not to get too involved in trying to answer, because I'm trying to focus on science, but I would not be surprised if we all started getting younger within 5 years. Okay. Now, people like Aubrey de Grey and some others are giving like 2050, 2040, things like that as a day when that might happen. I think it's going to happen sooner. And I think the only reason it's not going to even happen sooner than that is because of the lack of funding. But let me actually take this moment to actually recommend that if people really want to see the genuine leaders in the world speak, there's a conference called RADFest, RAADFEST. RAD stands for Revolution Against Aging and Death. And it totally, as much as possible, steers away from the charlatans. Mm-hmm. And so pretty much this will be their third or fourth conference coming up in October in Las Vegas. And it has got all the world's best in there, speaking on things people can do to extend their lifespans and health spans as long as possible.
Yeah.
And I also want to plug my books too.
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
I have 2 books. They're both available on Amazon.com. One called Curing Aging and the other one called Telomere Lengthening. Curing Aging was written first. I would recommend people read that one first. And then Telomere Lengthening came along later. And that's the book that goes into a tremendous amount of details about why telomerase doesn't cause cancer, why it actually prevents cancer. It talks about a lot of reasons why some things only decrease the rate of shortening, some things lengthen it. It uses a tug-of-war analogy to talk about telomere shortening and aging. And they're both really good books. They're very short, to the point. I don't believe in writing a book that has a lot of entertaining stories about case studies and stuff like that. I just get right to the point. People typically sit down and read the whole thing in one day.
That's great. I'm definitely going to get those. And folks, if you're listening, go ahead and order those books off Amazon, as well as check out Bill's website, Sierra Sciences. Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a fascinating interview, and I'm definitely going to RADFest, so I'll see you there. But also, I will link to your website and all of the information we discussed and some studies in the show notes, so people can go find all that information and then link to some of the tests and the supplements that we talked about. So thank you again for coming.
Okay, thank you. Talk to you later.